Welcome, everyone. Feel free to scoot in so that latecomers can easily come in and sit as well. Very excited to see so many animal people here. It's really wonderful. Yes, thank you. That's worth cheering. My name is Stien van der Ploeg. I lead Animal Charity Evaluators, and I'm feeling very privileged to support Mahi here to talk about this session titled Greater Than the Sum of Its Parts, Combining Interventions for Maximum Impact. I'm really eager to get this conversation started because I think that exploring the power of the synergy between different interventions is a really important topic if we want to advance animal welfare as soon as possible and do it as effectively as possible. Mahi will do a talk and share about the different interventions, how they can be intertwined for maximum impact. And Mahi is someone that you should listen to. He is the CEO of the Albert Schweitzer Foundation and has all kinds of very impressive accolades like the Peter Singer Prize, and he's on Vox's Future Perfect list. But he's also made mistakes. I hope you don't mind me saying that. He started out as an angry vegan and an ineffective altruist in 2008. But he embraced learning and got more than 100 food companies to ditch cage eggs. He's also contributing to ending beak searing for laying hens and is seeing through higher welfare goals for aquaculture as well. On a personal note, when I started my job a year and a half ago at ACE, he was one of the first people who was willing to give me brave and kind feedback and ask me lots of questions, which I'm very grateful for. Before we get started, a reminder, use Swapcard for questions. I'll be using some of those and also some prepared questions. And there will be office hours right after in Balkan, which is, I think, just around the corner or next door. Now, please give Mahi a very warm welcome, also to heat up this room a little bit. Thank you, Mahi.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Stien, for this kind introduction. Let's please talk about mistakes. I'm the first to admit I've made quite a few, and I think it's an important part of our journey and in terms of getting better. Great to be here. This is a topic, as Stien introduced, and it's a topic I've been thinking about a lot recently. And it could have many implications for where our organizations and the movement could be heading in the next couple of years. I actually did think it was very original thinking that I came up with until a couple of weeks ago I was in the US and I talked to several leaders, and turns out they have similar thoughts. But this, to my knowledge, is the first time this is addressed publicly. So I do hope I can add some value here. The talk has a farmed animal focus. However, I do believe there are some implications for other cause areas. So everyone's welcome, and hope we can all learn from each other. And I'd like to ask you, please do look for flaws in the thinking that I present to you today, because it might have some implications, as I said, at least for Albert Schweitzer Foundation, maybe for some other groups. So the fate of the movement is basically in your hands, no pressure. But do call out any inconsistencies or any flawed thinking. I think that would be very helpful, and don't worry about being too kind, I can take some criticism. So this is, I think, how we used to think, or how maybe some people still think about interventions. And by the way, when I speak of interventions, I mean things like leafletting, corporate work, lobbying, etc. We list some interventions, we add some expected values, and then we make some decisions based on these expected values. And One way is kind of to, in this case, C has the highest expected value. Look for the group or the groups in the movement that are best at doing C, and then give them a ton of money just to do C, and what could go wrong? Hopefully it could improve impact. However, I think we could be wiser about this. I think we could think of maximizing impact and looking at interventions more as kind of a riddle, where we figure out, can we make some tweaks to the interventions? Can we find some synergies? When should we do which intervention to maximize impact? And in this case, maybe take a minute or two, or maybe not a minute, but take a moment or two to figure out how you would solve this question. Let's say, again, we have some interventions and we can play with them a little bit and find synergies or make them work together nicely. And what would you come up with? So maybe you come up with this solution, you find like a little tweak where we get a higher expected value. Somebody else might say, well, wait a minute, the value can be higher. Maybe actually someone can come up with a 4-digit solution. Maybe someone thinks more out of the box and gets us to 5 digits. This, by the way, I think is the official solution. I looked this up on the internet, and this is where kind of the people who created this riddle, where they ended. But why stop there? Maybe there's better thinking around. We can actually go to 6-digit expected value if we do some little more tweaking and maybe some cheating in this case. We can get way higher. This is that we're entering genius territory right now. Maybe we can get even higher than that. Someone might come up with factorial solutions. Maybe again a little bit cheating, and maybe someone will take it too far and say, take a match, light everything on fire, and use the remaining match to draw infinity in the dust. Would look like that. That's taking it too far, but I think you get the idea. Let's be a little bit more creative of how we work with interventions and how we can do the best, make the best out of them. So I'd like to follow with a case study, and then my thoughts on what the case study and the thinking means for organizational design, and then I'll add some probably controversial thoughts on what it means for movement design. So let's dive right in. The case study here is getting Germany cage-free. That will be our task here. And we have a couple of interventions that can be used for that. And let's see how our predecessors went about and tried to solve this. So actually the plight of laying hens in cages has first been addressed in the 1970s. We had some interventions that were used, trying to figure out the clicker here, sorry. It's not working. There you go. So lobbying and investigations, media work have been used. And let's see what that did for the animals. Unfortunately, nothing. Actually, the share of laying hens in cages grew up to over 90% in this period of time. And maybe we can argue that some groundwork has been done, but overall, I would say 3 decades of no progress, or maybe even the opposite, is quite telling. So let's see if later we came up with better solutions. In fact, 1999 was the time when legal work for the first time was introduced. And this may be the first synergy we're actually seeing here. So we had some investigations. The case was in the media. And the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, so one federal state of Germany, decided to ask the constitutional court in Germany if it's okay to keep laying hens in battery cages. Is that compliant with the legal system we have in Germany? And our founder, Wolfgang Schindler, was a lawyer, and he was appointed to bring the case to the Supreme Court or the Constitutional Court, and he actually did convince the court that it's not compliant with the German law system to keep hens in battery cages. So that was the first big win. The win had some downsides. It didn't include imports, so that went beyond the scope of what the Constitutional Court could talk about. It could only talk about domestic production. And also didn't include colony cages. Those were invented later, so the egg industry came up with a new type of system that wasn't covered with this win. So this is something on our case study, on our journey, we'll have to fix later. Let's see if we can get there, but let's look at the remaining years. The movement actually went back to its two interventions. It had been used before, and unfortunately, again, we're seeing zero results. Until 1 year later, again, Wolfgang Schindler, the founder of Albert Schweitzer Foundation, got tired of not making any progress, and he decided to try something new. For the very first time in Germany, as far as I know, corporate work had been done, and he decided to talk to Aldi, one of the large German retailers, and he actually convinced them to stop selling battery cages. So in that case, the legal work that had been done before was pretty helpful, because he could say, hey, the Constitutional Court already said it's not okay to do this. Do you want to be a retailer who actually supports a system that has been deemed unconstitutional by the court? And Aldi went ahead and said, okay, we're going to go cage-free. So this was a major win. And so we were able to fix the problem that the Constitutional Court only covered domestic production. Maybe a quick side note, this may be the last EAG where we can make fun of ChatGPT. So you see the spelling is not spot on, but my bet is that will be fixed soon. So this was version 4.0. Let's see what the next versions bring. All right, how did we proceed in our case study? In the coming years, we went back to those two. Third time's the charm, right? Unfortunately, no. So nothing happened for a number of years, even though we had this huge win. That was the only corporate win, and nothing happened anymore. And in 2008, I joined Albert Schweitzer Foundation, and I talked to our founder and said, hey, so you got this huge win. Why didn't you or the movement continue doing that? And he didn't really know. It was kind of the movement wasn't happy with everything that had been agreed with Aldi. There was like an agreement that Aldi wouldn't be campaigned against until other retailers would have done the same when cage-free too. And for some reason, nobody continued with corporate work. So that was my idea, to just bring corporate work back to the movement. And we started reaching out to the other retailers, said, hey, Aldi has been doing this, maybe it's your turn now. And so we went back to corporate work, and all major retailers and all other major food companies decided to go cage-free within just a couple of years, and not only make the commitment, but also make the transition. So that was a very fast transition. So let's look at what happened until today. We now have a cage ban coming into place. That was decided in 2015, interestingly, not through lobbying by animal orgs, but the former minister or secretary of state of agriculture actually publicly announced that cages don't play any economic role anymore, so we might as well outlaw them. So that was the reasoning back in the days. We are now 96% cage-free in Germany. We've seen synergies between investigations, legal work, corporate work. Not so much lobbying, didn't seem to play a huge role in this. We'll look at that in a minute. And I'm happy to announce that the cage-free work in Germany is done now. We have a ban coming into place by the end of next year. So case study finished, everything went well. So let's look at what's wrong with lobbying, maybe. Again, trouble with the clickers. So the way I see lobbying is a little bit like this. The prompt was David versus Goliath doing arm wrestling. And I think one naive way of lobbying that I also brought to the movement when I joined was to believe that we will win just because we have ethics and science on our side, and that will basically convince everyone, all political decision makers, to do the right thing. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Another naive way of thinking about lobbying is that you will win because maybe you finally have a somewhat progressive government on your side. One of the best examples that doesn't always help is maybe the Biden administration in the US. Maybe you have heard of Proposition 12. That was a tool of direct democracy. I see some nodding in the audience. So Californians were asked many years ago, do they not only want to ban certain practices, but also want to ban the sale of the products resulting from these practices? They voted with a resounding yes. About 2/3 of the people were in agreement with that. And then animal agriculture decided to fight this in court and actually went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And there, the Biden administration actually took the side of animal agriculture. Nonetheless, the animal side won, so that was a huge win for HSUS and some other groups. But it goes to show progressive governments are not always as helpful as we want them to be. And looking back at least my 15 years of experience in the movement, I think in most cases you need to generate a whole lot of momentum before you can actually win with some lobbying interventions. So as you had seen in the German case study, we got all these companies to go cage-free, and then the government didn't have trouble deciding that there will be a ban. That ban just wasn't fought by the industry because the industry had already realized that cage-free is the future. So that's one way of getting political wins. I think we should still take these wins just to make sure the corporate outreach work is kind of manifested legally. And I think also we should be a lot more creative in our lobbying. So we shouldn't do these arm wrestling matches where Goliath just doesn't want us to win at all. We should also look for interventions where Goliath doesn't mind or is maybe even in favor of us winning. So one example would be to protect the home market from cheap, low animal welfare imports. That is something they can easily side on. Maybe they will actually help us to get that ban. Or another way of thinking is implementing a plan that has been developed by the conservative government in Germany, where they came up with the idea to introduce a meat tax and use that money and even some extra money to help rebuild all farms in Germany to higher welfare standards. And actually, again, the animal ag side didn't mind that. Didn't happen yet, but we might have a chance after the next elections. So having said that, I think there is one valid argument to be a little bit more pro-lobbying, not just kind of the dark side of lobbying that I looked at, and that is that it takes time to build muscle. So maybe go into the lobbying sort of game and practice and training, knowing that you won't win a lot in the first couple of years or only be able to win like the easy matchups, and just build influence and build power over time. I think that's a very valid thing to do if you're aware that you're in it for the long run. All right, so that was the quick lobbying excursion. And now, so we've looked at 4 interventions. Let's try to generalize. I would say investigations, media work can be helpful for all interventions. Then legal work actually helps with corporate outreach work. As I have explained, you can go to companies and say, hey, there's a court ruling. It doesn't affect you right away, but what would your customers think if you decided to do something the courts don't think is legal in Germany by imports, for instance. And then all of that can be helpful for lobbying wins. And I think you should be very aware when kind of looking at what wins you want to get at what point in the movement of kind of these synergies and the way things work together. So for, maybe you want to build a larger version of that. I just, for simplicity's sake, kept it to 4 interventions here, but you would want to build a larger model for sure. And one way I simplified here, I only spoke of corporate work. So maybe we can double click on that and see if that's really how we can look at this. And it would look a little bit like this, right? So corporate work is 2, could maybe argue 3 versions of talking to companies. So the good cop, the friendly person, could be maybe a little bit pushy every once in a while, and the bad cop just launching campaigns and being a huge stress factor. And maybe you want to add industry work as even like the friendliest way of working with companies. So you actually do talk to producers and you help them improve their welfare standards. So after having looked at different interventions and potential synergies, let's look now at what that means for organizational design. So let's say we are all part of an organization and we need to decide which interventions we will use. So the first question we should ask ourselves, do we want to optimize for income, so money, or do we want to optimize for impact? So let's say I'm the, sorry, the clicker is not always doing what I wanted to do. Let's say I'm the CEO of our new organization and I want your input. How would you vote? Should we optimize for money? Raise your hand. Or should we optimize for impact? All right, that's pretty clear. Glad we are aligned. So again, ChatGPT didn't manage to make the animal side heavier. I tried several prompts to say the animals have more weight, put the animals lower than the money. It said, yes, here's a new version with the animals now lower. It was just that same picture over again. Maybe you would ask, isn't optimizing for impact and money the same thing? If you're in the EA space, it might be. But if you're outside of the EA space, you might do very different things if you want to optimize for money. You would probably work on cute animals instead of large numbers and huge suffering. Or you might just go where the money is. So you might talk to your big donors and ask them what they want you to do and execute on that. So we decided otherwise. Our new organization is going for impact. So the second question we want to ask ourselves is, do we see our group as one entity and we should optimize just the impact of that one entity? Or do we see our group as part of a network and we want to help optimize the impact of that network? So show of hands again. Do you want to optimize one organization or the entire network? All right, we're still in agreement. No internal conflicts so far. That's good. Actually, when you look at Albert Schweitzer Foundation's strategy, you will read a sentence like, we focus on approaches that have high added value for the movement. So coming back to our new organization, let's say we work in a country where we already have groups that do investigations well, we have groups that do lobbying, we have groups that do legal work. So we decide to do corporate work, right? Seems to make sense. It's kind of missing in the movement, and it should add huge extra value. So we start with that. We actually start picking some low-hanging fruits. We get some easy wins with good cop work. Everything's going well, and at some point we run out of low-hanging fruits to pick, and it gets harder. So we decide to build a campaigns team and start doing pressure campaigns. We start winning a couple of more campaigns. that is what I call ecosystem thinking 1.0. So that's exactly what happened at Albert Schweitzer Foundation. And right now I'm actually dissing our own strategy. I think there's kind of a next step to take because there's a problem with ecosystem 1.0 thinking, and that's this. So you try to be a good cop and a bad cop at once, and maybe call it medium cop, and it's very hard to do. You start alienating the companies you've been constructively working with. They don't trust you as much anymore. And you thought you were building synergies and higher impact, and however, you kind of created the opposite as well. And you can find these good cop, bad cop dynamics not working out so well because everyone is becoming medium cop in many countries across the world. I've basically seen this firsthand in the US. I'm seeing it in Germany. And actually, I'm not aware of many countries that have a good setup in that way, where the good cop, bad cop dynamic works very well. So that's one problem with ecosystem thinking 1.0. Another problem with ecosystem thinking 1.0 is this. It seems to make sense. Your funders like your thinking, they give you a lot of money. So you start again optimizing for money. And that kind of limits your overall impact. So now it's time to enter ecosystem thinking 2.0, or as I learned in the US, some other leaders are calling it movement design. And here we want to look at synergies that they can be higher when different groups focus on different interventions, given that the groups have a very similar strategic understanding. So both groups are EA or EA aligned. And in a way, you have to act against your own interests if you want to go beyond ecosystem thinking 1.0. Because, for instance, you've just raised a lot of money, and now you're changing strategy, and you stop doing something your donors really liked you doing. So how do we upgrade from ecosystem thinking 1.0 to 2.0? That's the big question here. And the questions could look something like that. Clicker. Right. So how should we divide our work? What are the gaps in the movement? What's the best way to maximize the impact in each country? And some potential answers: we could launch new groups. We could invite existing groups to our country. That's also very counterintuitive to a lot of groups. Or we could do spin-offs. So we could decide we run an intervention at our organization. That should no longer be the case. We actually have our team launch an own organization, or we actually just stop doing something, invite the other group to start doing the thing we just stopped. And that way we could find more synergies and have higher overall impact. So that comes with some challenges. One of this is this: your dollar bills could turn into coins because your funders don't love the idea of you stopping one intervention they really liked. We could maybe we got recommended by ACE because of the selections of intervention we chose, or that was a big part of the recommendation. Now we got rid of that. That's a risk to take. And yeah, it's not an easy situation for an organization to kind of go through these optimizing processes for movement's sake, for overall impact's sake, and not for the organization's own sake. Another potential problem we could run into would look like this. You could have internal difficulties. Your team could be worried about the change processes you're going through. And if you've ever run a group, you know how hard that can be. And despite all the challenges, I think that movement design is still something we should engage in because these guys need us to have their best interest in mind. So my experience so far is every time I've prioritized impact, the rest kind of worked itself out. And my hope is that this will be the case when we think and do movement design as well. So we are coming to the end of the talk. A quick recap. I would argue we should always check ecosystem and timing before judging interventions. So you can't say lobbying is just not a good intervention. It could be not a good intervention, for instance, at an early stage of your organization or of the movement. It could become a very effective intervention later on. We should be aware that adding an intervention could boost the overall impact in the movement. And it makes sense to split some interventions between groups. So I've talked at length about the good cop, bad cop situation. I would encourage you to think beyond that. That is just a very easy example, but there are probably other interventions that make sense when they're split up. And there could be tough decisions to be made. However, it could still boost the overall impact of our movement. So I hope this talk helps to spread the idea of creating synergies by optimizing organizational and movement design. Sorry, I forgot to put these in. So I spoke about inviting new groups, doing spin-off divestments, and movement design as kind of a topic to talk about. Donors would also be very important, because I don't think a lot of donors have thought this through and thought about what that means when they maybe supported Albert Schweitzer Foundation in Germany, and that was the only group they supported. And next month, I might be telling them, hey, there's actually a new group, and that creates synergies here in Germany. So you might want to consider funding that group too, and maybe even consider giving us less money instead for the overall impact. So I think a lot of conversations need to happen between organizations and donors. Thank you for being part of this, being part of the imaginary organization we just created. If you're interested in joining my real organization and you do speak German, please keep eyes open for our job offers. Unfortunately, that's the caveat. We currently can only hire people who do speak German. And that's it for now, and I'm looking forward to Q&A. Thank you.
I'll let you choose between the two seats.
Thanks.
For those of you who enjoy learning languages and want to learn German, Language Transfer has a full course in German. So, first, a quick follow-up. You mentioned you're not aware of many countries where the good cop, bad cop setup is implemented really well. What's a country that does have a strong setup?
My favorite example is the Netherlands, actually, your home country.
Ooh.
I don't think it is really intentionally built that way, but the Netherlands has a really badass bad cop, Wakker Dier. Oh. And they look at what the good cops are saying and asking from companies, and they take the same ask and go out there and just add the extra punch to it. And it works out extremely well. Like, the Netherlands has done some advancements that are way beyond what Germany has achieved. For instance, broiler work. They're basically done with the broiler work now. They're moving on to different topics. They're working on meat reduction. They've convinced some retailers to stop advertising meat. They seem to be at least 5 years ahead. And I think one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons is that they seem to have, either by chance or kind of by design, a very good movement design.
It's nice to hear. I hear that the Netherlands is also a bit ahead on insect farming, so maybe they can target that. Okay, a question about cake. So you can think of this synergistic, pluralistic approach as needing different ingredients that have a reaction. And it's the same with interventions. With cake, the proportions are really important. Is there a right proportion for the different interventions, either within an organization or between different organizations?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there is, and thank you for bringing that up. I know you've talked about this before, right? I think it very much depends on the market, where you're at, what's the next step for the movement. And yeah, I think I alluded to it a little bit. There may be a time and place where you want to really emphasize maybe on lobbying, and then maybe you're not making a cake, you're making a bread all of a sudden or something else, like you want a different end product. And I think that's really part of the thinking. And I think we should always be aware that also depending on the country and context, we might just need very different interventions. And that is also something donors should be very aware of, that just because maybe in their home market something works really well, it doesn't mean that in a different market they want to invest in, it's the same solutions that work as well.
And maybe even also for different animal species, that what works for chickens might not work for shrimp?
For sure, yeah, I think there's things to be considered. The more, I think, empathy people have for animals, the easier it is to run really big public-facing campaigns. For shrimp, I think it's more difficult. Fish is more difficult, so it might make sense to take more of an industry angle. Actually, some groups are going to the industry and talking about quality of the end product and using that to increase welfare standards. So even though that kind of goes against our intuition, it might actually achieve quite a bit. So yeah, really depends.
I'm going to take a quick look on Swapcart. Moritz wants to know, do you think lobbying may be more promising in lower middle income countries where the opposing industrial animal agriculture industry is not as strong yet?
Great question. Actually, I forgot to mention that. I do think that that's exactly the case. Like I said that sometimes you need a lot of wins to get lobbying wins. So you need a lot of corporate wins to get a law changed. But maybe in a country where animal agriculture is not as strong, you could get quick wins through lobbying. And I think we've seen that in a couple of countries where it was actually quite surprising when I received an email that in a more developing country, they got some quick lobbying wins. So yeah, that's for sure a good point.
Haven wants to know what some specific concrete things are that the movement should change right now to better take movement design thinking into account.
Yeah, I think one of the big ones right now is the good cop, bad cop work. Many groups in the US are unhappy with kind of the medium cop situation they found themselves in, and that's the same for Albert Schweitzer Foundation. So I think that's fixable if we kind of agree on who does what, and we are not scared of losing funding, but looking at the overall good. I think that's a big one, and maybe also I can speak more easily about my own organization. The very good cop work, the industry work we do on fish and shrimp might actually also make sense to just spin off, so it's their own organization. So we could start playing a different role. So right now, it's just Albert Schweitzer Foundation just plays that industry card, and I think there's more to be played to advance fish welfare.
I have a little bit of a wild question that might not make any sense, but it's about one of the later points you made about funding. There are some funders, especially in the animal advocacy space, who just only want to fund one type of intervention, maybe some deontological motivations going on there. And they might pull out of organizations that not just have vegan outreach, but also other strategies. People in the EA community are generally quite familiar with something like donation swapping. Have you considered if organizations could do intervention swapping, where I start doing something that I don't really want to do, but we got to split up because we got to split up the funders? Do you think that is at all a reality, or would that be too complicated because we have to deal with our staff and who knows what? Yeah,
I think there's a way of going forward with this. Maybe like kind of a medium cop might decide that their campaigns team could find a home in a different organization. So it could be kind of a team swapping, bringing funders also in it, or actually helping fund that transition. Things like that could, in theory, be very impactful. And I think there are some things to be really aware of, that maybe the culture change from one organization to another might not be a great fit for these people. I think there's a lot we have to consider, but in general, I think it's something we should for sure consider.
Yeah, and one thing that I also really like about your approach here is that it, not necessarily in response to this question that I just asked, but in general, the larger collaboration is that it is so movement-centric or animal-centric and not organization-centric, and that might also help with the scarcity mindset that is happening between organizations, where there is so little funding that, yeah, I think this might also help with that.
Yeah, and maybe just to briefly add, I saw that farm animal funders had this grant where they wanted different organizations to apply together.
Pooling, yeah.
Yeah, so that may be interesting. And also maybe having pools where funders are say, okay, I want to donate to ending factory farming in Europe, let's say, and then some grant makers make the best possible decisions of which organizations that should go to, and also look how well organizations collaborate, how well they think about the ecosystem and all of that. So maybe that's another angle here.
I'm going to see, we probably don't have that much time left, but let's see. Ruben, I'm not sure. How would this concretely look, making a theory of change with all the players in one country?
Yeah, so you'd start looking at, I'd stay with the good cop, bad cop example, because it's very simple, and I understand it quite well, I think. So you would start looking at which organizations are there. Are they strategically aligned? So in Germany, would probably say there are not too many EA-minded organizations. So even though there's maybe PETA there, when they run campaigns, it usually doesn't help our good cop work because they do something completely different. So you'd have to kind of figure out, is there a need for a new organization? Should that be launched? Or could another organization just come to your country? I'm actually currently speaking to one organization considering coming to Germany. And I've been kind of calling for that for quite some time, and nobody answered. But now finally we might get an answer. And then figure out, can we help them build a campaigns team? What do they need to know? What knowledge do they need to know in terms of starting an organization? And yeah, going step by step, making it happen.
Okay, let's do one more. Martin's question jumped up. When good cop, bad cops are separate but work together behind the scenes, would this make industry actors trust good cops less? There's also a lot of spying and sleuthing going on from the opposition. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think good cops would be well advised not to break their NDAs. Like when a company trusts them and decides to work closely with them, they can't just feed all that information to different groups. However, I think there might be ways of the more radical, the bad cop group understanding what's needed when, and maybe there are ways of kind of communicating that doesn't go into NDA breaches. Yeah, that should all be explored. And I think the bad cop can probably get a good sense of which companies are moving and which are not, maybe through their own outreach and asking companies and then making good decisions of who to campaign against.
Thank you. I say let's end it like that, and we can, or you can ask more questions to Mahi later. Thank you, everyone, for listening and for caring about non-human animals. Thank you, Mahi, for getting us to think about this and about how to maximize our impact and collaborate more. Mahi Klosterhalfen, everyone, please give him one more applause.